Hey, Chrissy. I can't hear you. You're muted. You're still muted. Am I?
Yay! Hi, Ian.
Hello. How you doing? Welcome in.
Thank you. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
So this should go well.
Yeah. I want to see how it goes. I'm excited. Damn, where is everyone? That's my sister in the chat, by the way.
That's your sister? Okay.
Yeah.
Joy? That's
Yeah.
okay. All right. Awesome. Yeah, so I think procedurally, I think we're just gonna like I think we should be fine. We're just gonna have to it's just gonna get done, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Next hour and a half. So we'll see the video after.
Okay. I'll start. Do you want me to start recording when like it first
Yeah,
starts, or
like
when it starts?
at 12. Um
Okay. Okay, I can do that.
okay.
So there's Ben.
So let me send some text out.
Mm-hmm.
Um all right. So Angel.
Yes.
Is your professor on their way, or
Well, yeah, I sent her the email. She said
with the link?
I sent her this. I sent her the Zoom link. It's the same one as this one, right? The one that you. Okay.
Hello, Victoria. How are you doing? Awesome. So okay. Can you hear the feedback from the text going through, or no? You can? Awesome. So, hello, Natasha. If 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 you're speaking or part of groupies, it would be, yeah, much appreciated if you put your cameras on. Um, today should be a really great meeting and should provide insight for a lot of students and other participants who join the Zoom. Just to briefly like go over some things. I'm gonna start and kind of just cursory go over, what we're doing, the kind of the mission of the conference. Then afterwards, I will give Victoria a little introduction, and uh, um, and then Victoria, you can speak and share. Um, I'm going to introduce you and reference your article in LA Times, and then just say, like, if you guys want to check this out afterwards, you guys could feel free to, if that's okay with you. And then you could speak, and then once you're finished, it'll come back to me. And my grandfather was supposed to speak today, but because of health-related reasons, um, he couldn't make it as a speaker. But I do have a video he prepared, so I will screen share that video, and then we will Angel at that point will then introduce our professor from SMC, which we're grateful to have here, and she could kind of give some context behind what's going on, and finally we'll open it up to the floor for a Q&A, a brief Q&A, and then we should be all good. And maybe at the end I'll show some potential resources for Ukraine if people want to donate or help in any way, what's families and people in need. So that's kind of briefly the gist. Do we have any questions or comments? No? Okay, good, good. Five minutes. I'm gonna quickly do some advertising. So I'll be back and very soon. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our informational Zoom on Ukraine and the conflict that's going on. So just some, beginning things to get out of the way. If everyone could, remain respectful and stay muted throughout the duration of the Zoom. At the very end of the speakers, you will have an opportunity to contribute with Q&A. So we're gonna wait maybe 5 minutes or so and just see how many people join in and filter in before we actually begin, because I don't want anyone to miss out on what these speakers have to say. So let's officially start at 12:05 and see just how many people join in that duration, because one of our speakers did we couldn't make it today, so we will have a little bit more time to deal with, so we might as well just use that extra time to see if any more people come in, and we could educate the most people. So we'll officially start at 12:05, and I'll introduce Victoria, our first speaker, and we'll get it started. All right, thank you. For all those coming in, we're gonna just start a little later at 12:05. We just wanted to get the most people in as possible before we began. So just be patient and hold on for 3 more minutes, and then we'll begin. Thank you so much. All right, thank you for everyone for waiting patiently. So today we wanted to accomplish 2 things. We wanted to help people that are living in the United States get a little perspective about what's going on seemingly very far away from us. And we have speakers today and a video to share that will help personalize what's going on and contextualize what's going on. 2 things that I think are very important so people can understand what's going on a little better. So our first speaker, Victoria, was recently featured in an article for the Los Angeles Times. If you guys want to, visit this and see the video and read her letter, you can do it at this website right here. But I'm gonna give the floor to Victoria so she can tell you guys a little bit about her experience over the last few months and how she's been affected by this conflict in Ukraine. So Victoria, if you can speak now, that would be awesome. Sorry. There we go. Awesome. All right, continue.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for finding time for this amazing Zoom meeting that has such a noble aim. And thank you, Ian, for inviting me to be part of it. I was thinking about the structure of what I'm going to tell you, and I tried to make some notes. I tried to put up a comprehensive story, but that's hard. I cannot even structure thoughts in my head when I think about Ukraine and everything that's been going on. So I just will tell you, I will share several stories of the life of my friends, my family, and a little bit of what it was like to be in Ukraine in pre-war. I spent in Ukraine 1.5 years during the last 3 years. I went there during COVID in summer 2020, and I just come back in December. We all heard about the war. We all were kind of scared, but we knew that won't be happening because wars just don't happen in our times. That's not possible. That's not something somebody would do. And on top of that, we already had war happening in Ukraine since 2014. This war was a very uncomfortable war for everyone, so nobody really stepped in to help us. It was disguised under the name of conflict and was kept under the rug. Crimea was annexed. 300 Crimean Tatars have been abducted and nobody really knows what happened to them. Crimea was called the authentic land of Russia, and everybody kind of made peace with this. And for us, the declaration of war, of a new war from Putin, was not a new thing. We already had war, so we couldn't imagine something worse happening. And on February 24th, I was getting ready for the night. I was putting my toddler to sleep, and I received a very disturbing text from my friend in Kyiv saying that that's too late to escape. The explosion is several blocks away. We cannot leave. Vicky, we cannot go anywhere. And I was offering my apartment in Lviv a week before that. And she was laughingly saying that it would be great to go to Lviv to visit some interesting touristic spots, but it was half jokingly. And now she was not able to evacuate. She eventually decided to go to her mom's, who was living in the suburbs that you all know these names of now. You heard about Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel. That's where she went. That's where she wanted to hide. That's where she felt would be safe. There was a little urban agent. This area was not discovered by Nazis in 1943. That's why they all felt it would be safe there. A week after, I received another disturbing text. I was talking to her on a daily basis, and she was telling me, yeah, we hear the explosion. They are close, but it's okay. It's okay here. It's safer than in Kyiv. And she had 2 kids, a 10-year-old boy and a 2-month-old baby girl on her hands. And she told me, Vicky, tank is in our yard. That's it. They came in. And then boom, 3 weeks, I have not heard a single word from my friend. Occasional texts that she would send me saying that there's no food, there's no water, there's no electricity. We are living in a bomb shelter with this little girl, and I'm praying for my breast milk to be here because she would just starve. She had a 19-year-old grandma who was not aware that the war is happening. They were hiding this fact. And then when she finally said, why we are sitting here, why can't we just go back to our house? They told her, come on, that's war happening. We've been hiding from you, but that's what's happening. And then 3 weeks later, I heard about the green corridor that was opened to evacuate people from that village. And I tried to pass this information to her through the chain of friends that had some kind of contact, because all of their phones have been taken away from them, and I didn't even know if all of them are alive. And then she texted me that they are finally in Kiev. They had to leave her grandma and her parents behind because they were not able to walk 20 kilometers. And there's one disturbing thing that she told me about this evacuation trip that probably stay with me forever. She was able to hide one single phone, and it started beeping when they were going past Russian soldiers. And she knew that they could get shot for this. And she gave the phone to her husband and was carrying the stroller with her baby girl, and she told him to shut it down. He was not able to do it because the battery was almost dead. He was not seeing the screen, and he felt he just left behind with his son. And they asked Victoria, she's also Victoria, to wait for them. And she told me something that just still blows my mind. She said, I could not stop because I saw that we will all get shot, that we stopped. And I just wanted to save at least this little child. So I left my husband and I left my son behind, realizing that they could get shot because you cannot stop in this evacuation column. You just have to keep going. So I was ready to let them go just to save my little child. This is something that a very loving wife and a loving mother said. This was this choice she had to make on the spot. And there are millions of stories like that. My friend is working as a legal expert with sexual victims of this war. And she is helping Russian-speaking woman, Ukrainian who's speaking Russian. And this woman said that she's not able to use Russian to describe this. She's no longer feeling safe to use this language because people who came to kill her were using the same language. And this language was used as an excuse to liberate them. And she started learning Ukrainian to be able to speak to legal advisors and to her therapist. And this is just heartbreaking that they took away her identity. They took away her language. She's not feeling safe having this language. I myself speak Russian with my husband, who is Russian, even though I'm from a Ukrainian-speaking family. I'm from Western Ukraine. And it's okay for me to share this language with him. But the other day when I went outside, I went to the Russian store to pick up Ukrainian candies that I wanted to present on one of the events. And the woman at the cashier occasionally asked me something in Russian, and I was unable to respond. It's not that I have something against Russian. Again, I speak Russian with my husband at home, but this outside Russian is currently traumatizing me. I'm afraid when I hear this around me. And this is experience that people have in Ukraine as well, even in a bigger context, because they are living there right now. And it's hard to differentiate who is the enemy and who is not. And back in Ukraine in August, I was reading a book, Woman in Berlin, about a German woman who was gang raped by Russian soldiers who came to liberate Berlin from Nazis. And when I was reading this book about those people hiding in bomb shelters, I thought, oh my God, this is something that would never happen again. And 7 months later, I'm finding the stories that are 1,000 times much worse than those described in the book by Martha Hiller. I had spoken to my friends in Russia, and I knew that they are under enormous attack of propaganda and that they cannot see the things the way we see them, of course. But when my friend of 10 years, whom I met here in the US, who has traveled the world, who has access to all the information, who graduated from the Academy of International Relations, told me that Russia never invades for no reason. And Russia never starts wars. And I understand that the war is bad, but this is just a geopolitical game and we cannot do anything about it. We're just small people I decided that this dialogue has no sense, that it's better probably for her safety even to not text her because their phones are being searched. And I just don't want to, I think that it's just a waste of time. We have to concentrate on Ukrainian and how we can help. And it's just all the effort that I was throwing to tell them the truth are vain. And all those people who currently fleeing to the West and trying to speak about the Russian angle, they rarely acknowledge their responsibility and rarely start their stories with "I'm sorry." The first thing they say that it's you have to raise the sanctions because ordinary Russians are suffering. So at this point, I think that there is no point in dialogues. And I just hope that whatever I'm telling you right now will show you a different perspective, not the one that you see in news. Every day when I wake up, the first thing I do, I check the map of bombings. Because my 16-year-old sister that is graduating this year, that she was supposed to be ready for her prom, but there would be no prom. There are no classmates to say goodbye to during this graduation party because they all scattered around the world. And every day when I text her, she tells me, I spent 3 hours in the bomb shelter. Today it was good, just 30 minutes in a bomb shelter. Today I had to wake up at 4 a.m. And my mom is currently volunteering, so she's not at home most of the time. She's visiting different parts of Ukraine, trying to get the supplies to the areas that need this most. And my sister is there mostly by herself. And when I think about this bomb shelter, I'm not even sure it's safe. If Russian bomb hits the house, I'm not even sure they would be able to recover people hiding in this bomb shelter because it's a 9-story building. She spent a month in Poland trying to be safe from war, but she came back because she was not able to be that far away from our family members, and we couldn't make her stay there. And my friends who evacuated to Kyiv, that is not safe, still not safe, don't want to evacuate because whatever they went through in that village close to Kyiv felt so much worse that even being in the potentially very dangerous Kyiv now feels like a safe place to them. And I cannot describe the horror of living through this. It's like having the worst day of your life happening on a daily basis. You wake up and you don't know who is alive. You go through the feed on your Facebook and seeing those green dots next to the names of the people you love and know they're still alive, that they're still safe, breathes peace, but you still know that there's 12 hours ahead and something can change. And this constant feeling of stress, of knowing that the worst can happen every second. Lviv, where I spent a year and a half, last 3 years, is a cultural capital of Ukraine. I attended the reading of the poet Yuri Ruf, a very talented 40-year-old poet. He died a month ago because he had to protect our country. My brother, my cousin, who had just had his baby girl born a month ago, received a draft notice. He has to join army now. His baby girl can grow up not knowing he's dead. She was born with tanks going around the maternity ward. This is a reality in 21st century for my people. And believe me, those stories are not the worst. When I talk to my friend who is a legal advisor and who is working with sexual crime victims, and she's telling me about a 1-year-old baby being raped by 2 soldiers. And some of them even filmed this. I cannot find strength to live with this. I just hold my toddler and I'm hoping that I'm healing all the babies that suffered from this war. There's another story of triplets. 3 9-year-old girls raped by a gang of Russian soldiers in front of their mother. And another friend of mine has a cousin who was in Mariupol with her 6-year-old son. She was raped in front of him for several days. She died from wounds. He was evacuated to Kyiv. He is now in a psychiatric ward with a strand of gray hair. He is not talking. That 6-year-old boy is not talking. He will be taken to live with his mother in Czech Republic, but I'm not sure how many stories like that we have. We still have Kharkiv. We still have Donetsk and Luhansk region that are still under occupation. We have infiltration camps that people have to go through in case they want to leave Russian occupied territories. And 50% of people who go through these camps, they just don't come out. There was a story of a paramedic who was trying to evacuate with her 4-year-old girl from Mariupol, and she was left there in the camp, and the girl was put on the evacuation bus by herself. There are millions of stories like that, and I'm so lucky that nobody from my closest family suffered, but it doesn't make me feel better because I still am in deep pain for every Ukrainian soul going through these atrocities. And even if it is stopped now, at this moment, it will take us years and generations to heal. We will be the nation of PTSD. We will be the nation with enormous trauma that I'm not sure how to heal. I'm not even talking about the financial and economic components of this, but up to February 2024, we will be peaceful people who spoke Russian, who spoke English, who had students from all over the world on our street, who were super tolerant. I never ever said something about Crimea to my friends in Russia. I never ever accused them of anything. And we've been invaded just like that. Our life has been turned down just like that. And I'm just hoping that the world understands this and we won't be made to make peace with people who came to kill us. There's no room for diplomacy right now. The only thing that motivates me is that Carthage must be destroyed, that this ideology that was never punished. The same thing was happening to Chechnya, and Putin was not even president back then. So we cannot blame everything on Putin. But if you read about Chechnya, the same sexual crimes, the same level of destruction was happening there. But the world just ignored it. And this regime was never punished for the cruelties that were committed. So there's no diplomacy. This just has to be stopped in a different way. And I hope that the world hears Ukraine and that the world won't get used to this picture of, conflict happening in Ukraine. This is a disaster. This is hell. This is the final episode in Don't Look Up, where they are sitting at the table and waiting to be destroyed. This is how we live every day in Ukraine. And if not for my little toddler, I would probably just go there and join an army as a paramedic. I'm going through a training right now, and this is something I will do because I feel that donating and speaking is just not enough. I want to aid the army, and without this little child, I would just go there and be part of the Ukrainian force that is trying to liberate their land. Thank you so much for listening this far, and I hope that you learned something.
Thank you, Victoria. It's just extremely difficult to hear something so personal about something that's seemingly just showing up on our feeds, and we don't have that type of knowledge that you just shared. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. Obviously, Victoria said a lot of things. And if anything jumped out to you and you wanted further clarification, you will have opportunities at the end of the conference. Yesterday, I was talking to my grandfather, who is Russian speaking, but grew up in Ukraine, and I wanted him to speak here. Unfortunately, he's having some health related problems and he cannot speak. And yesterday he pre-recorded a video that I'm going to share with you guys. And as we were figuring out how to show this video, I've known my grandpa for my entire life, and I've never seen him get choked up or emotional. And as we were watching the video together, he did, and it was just a moment that I won't forget. So even though I'm somewhat far removed from being in Russia, as I am like a descendant, it was just heartbreaking to hear about my distant relatives. So I will share the video right now. One moment.
Yeah, called my cousin in Russia a month ago. He lives on the Don River of Rostov near Crimea. He told me that not much had changed since the beginning of the war. His town didn't really see any big changes, but that he was worried about our aunt who lives in Ukraine. Our Aunt Vera is 96 years old. She's hard of hearing, her eyesight is not that great. So her daughter came from Israel to help take care of her. And now we can't get in touch with her. The phones don't work, so we don't know what's happening. They live in Slovyansk, which is not far from Donetsk, the war zone. So we're worried about them. I visited my Aunt Vera in the year 2004 and stayed there for a week. My uncle also lives there in that same town, or he used to live there in the same town. She was a bookkeeper for a bakery, a large bakery. Her husband was a member of the Communist Party, and they had a country place with a bath, where a sauna, where you went in and got poured hot water on a stove, and had bird branches, and whipped yourself with bird branches, and then went into a cold water. But kind of fun. We did it, we stayed with them for a week, so it was fun. A few years later, my uncle said that the war came very close to Slavyansk, the Donetsk war, the separatists who were taking over some of the territory near the Russian border, and that an explosion caused his windows to blow out. So one of his neighbors helped put plastic on the windows, and his son, who Zhenya, who's my cousin, of course, and who lives just across the border in Russia, came to take him away from there. But it was very hard to cross the border, and but he took him away. They had to abandon everything in the apartment, and he took him to his house just across the border in Russia. And he lived there with them for a few years, and then eventually he died. And my cousin Zhenya, which is Eugene in Russian, died of COVID last year. It's incredible because his wife, his daughter, and his son are all medical doctors. And he died, of COVID. So sad. I just feel so sad. And anyway, my when I spoke to my cousin Vladimir, we would call him Volodya, in Russian. He lives near on the Don River, near the Black Sea, near Crimea, and he said that he can't get in touch with my relatives. We have relatives in Kiev, just outside of Kiev, where the war zone is. Right on the river in Irpin. I visited my aunt Katya there when I was there in 2004, and she lived just near the river. Actually, her grandson bought a condo, a luxury condo, right close to the river, and that's where they blew up the bridge, and the Russian army had a time crossing. So I'm pretty sure that his condo is blown up, and my aunt Katya's granddaughter. I don't know what's happening to her. We can't. There's no phones that work. We can't contact anybody anymore. But we're just waiting to see what's going to happen. Well, that's the state of affairs. I'm worried about my family. I have pictures of my family going all the way back to the year 1900, 122 years ago, living in Odessa and in Rostov. So our relatives go back generations and generations in the Ukraine. Of course, we are Russian speakers. We speak Russian, but we're from Ukraine, and it's so sad. It's so sad.
So thank you for listening to that. My grandpa hopefully provided some more information and insight. So next I'm going to let Angel introduce our expert on this. So thank you.
Yeah. So our next speaker is actually a professor I took last semester in art history. Her name is Natasha Medvedev, and I remember taking her and sending her a message telling us that she had roots in Ukraine, family there, and she knows, she has roots in Ukraine, and just thought that she could tell us about all her expertise and her insight about being from her family from Ukraine.
Hello, everyone. Angel keeps saying expertise. It's a little tricky. After what Victoria was saying and Jan's grandfather, it's really hard to, I remember, Angel wrote in his email saying, yes, this is going to be an informal gathering, but please give us some historical background and please try to stay objective. And I have to say, it's very hard to be objective. I struggled really with this and keep struggling. I've right now at UCLA, I'm teaching a class on Russian avant-garde. And I was given this assignment before the war started. And once it started, I actually wanted to quit. I wanted to go and say, I will not be able to teach this class. And I came to my students on the first day and said, I was going to cancel the class because I cannot imagine myself pronouncing the word Russian. I didn't think that I will be able to actually speak about Russian culture. But instead, we kind of made this a work in progress, and this class is quite phenomenal because we're exploring aspects of the quote-unquote Russian avant-garde where actually it was the Ukrainian artists that were kind of appropriated by the Russian mythology and Russian history as Russian. which many didn't know, and even I didn't know growing up in the former Soviet Union. So just to give you a little bit of a background, I was raised in Kiev. I still have family there. My family is actually in Irpin, and they were right in the midst of the horrors that Victoria was elaborating on. And the women and children were able to escape to safety. And my cousin is in the army. He volunteered to the militia, to the territorial defense group, and he was in the group that were clearing in Bucha after Bucha was liberated. And his words, and I quote, were that I'm ready to tear their throats with my bare teeth if I can. So he actually since then joined the regular army and is being trained right now to go to the front. And he's not a very young man, he's in his late 40s. And never been a professional soldier, but he wants to be on the front, like right in the front lines, if possible. So it's very hard to be objective, and it's very hard to talk about historical context. But I thought that, so I made a few points just so that I keep on task, and I wanted to provide, if that's of interest, that's what Angel said, that you might be interested in the history of Ukraine and the history of the Ukraine and Russian relationship. So I just wanted to give a few points about history, and if I'm going too far into the history, then forgive me, because I just thought that I'll start from the beginning. There was a common Russian saying that Kiev is the mother of Russian cities. Mать городов русских, if anybody understands me in Russian, Victoria did. And it's, it's a myth. There is a element to this mythology. It was the saying and this kind of idea of a Muscovite kingdom or Russian empire later on as a heir to the Kievan Rus didn't really develop until way into the 19th century. But if we had to think about what Kievan Rus was, then it was a series of principalities that were established in the territory that's now Ukraine. And being a professor, can I share my screen? Is it possible? Can you allow me the screen sharing? I'm horrible. I need visual tools. I cannot do it without. Yeah, am I? No, it still says that you've disabled the host. No?
I will make you host so you can share.
Okay,
Yes.
if that works.
How that works. All right. Just change it back to me after you're done. So
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Okay, hops now. Okay, I see it. Okay, perfect. So let me just do it this way. Okay, that worked. Okay, perfect. Let me just 1 second. So you're still seeing, you see the PowerPoint, right? I hope I'm sharing the right screen, and I hope I'm sharing the right map. Okay, just right. Anybody show me the thumb up? You see the Kievan Rus? Yes. Okay, perfect. So just to to mention that, right? So we said that this was a series of principalities. It was established in the 9th century, in the late 800, and Kiev just celebrated the 1540-year anniversary of its establishment in 882 of the Common Era. So, and in the late 10th century, this series of principalities converted to Christianity, and the so-called Kievan Rus reached its golden age in the 11th century. So we're talking about the main principality being in Kiev, and then the kind of secondary and tertiary in terms of the power and importance principalities in the rest of the territory. And the way that political succession worked in the Kievan Rus actually led to its demise, because the princes, the main prince would be in Kiev, and the succession would go to a younger brother and a younger brother, moving principalities from the lesser ones to Kiev, as opposed to being hereditary to a son. And that led to a lot of political problems and kind of infighting between the different principalities. And eventually they disintegrated under the Mongol invasion in the 13th century, and Kiev was burned in 1240. And the remaining princes shifted their seats of power to the north, to Vladimir Suzdal Principality, establishing eventually establishing Moscow, and eventually establishing the Muscovite Kingdom, and that would later claim itself as the sole successor to Kievan Rus. And then the rest of the princes shifted west, establishing the Principality of Galicia-Volhynia, which would eventually become absorbed into the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and then later in the 16th century into Polish Kingdom, or Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And this would leave the territory that is today's eastern Ukraine, and this is where the bulk of the war is actually happening. It would leave this territory as the so-called no man's land, or the empty plains, as it was labeled by the cartographers in the 17th and even 18th century. And that's kind of where the term Ukraine comes, because the Ukraine, meaning the borderland of the Polish-Lithuanian Kingdom, not the borderland of the Muscovite Kingdom, as the Russian Empire claimed, but it's the kind of the borderland, or the wild east of Europe, as they were claiming it. I don't know if you can see this map. It has a very interesting perspective, because we have the Black Sea and the Crimea at the top, and the Muscovite kingdom at the bottom, and then the Polish, and then the Romanian kingdoms at the top on the right. So it's kind of flipped over. It's always interesting to look at the maps when they're flipped in a different perspective than the Eurocentric position, but so I find this map particularly interesting. But as you can see, even in the 18th century, there was a territory that was still called deserted land, the empty land, because it was kind of not really part of either Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth or the Muscovite Kingdom. And this is that territory that's mostly contested now in this current conflict, and will probably be contested, because the Russian Empire wouldn't be so easy to give its territory, and the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation right now, they are really continuing that same imperial project as was begun specifically in the 18th century by the Peter the Great, and then later Catherine the Great, that transformed the Muscovite Kingdom in what they called the Russian Empire. And as part of their imperial expansion toward the west, toward the east, of course, also eventually they have reached the Pacific in their contiguous territorial expansion, but as part of their expansion to the west, and as a first real step in the imperial or the colonial conquest. These quote unquote no man's land, and then the lands that were so the territory that's now Ukraine, were the first major conquest by the Russian Empire. And in a way, we can say that Ukraine is what makes the Russian Empire the empire. So one of the major issues, or maybe the issue in this conflict, is that Putin as a, or we'll call it Kremlin, Putin's government, right? That establishment as the heir to the Russian Empire and the heir to empire and then the Soviet Union, they feel that in order to be the Russian Empire, they have to have Ukraine. And they would not want it separated from them easily. So that's because without the Ukraine, Russia cannot be an empire. There was a very interesting phenomenal state that developed in this so-called no man's land, and that was the Zaporozhian siege, or the Zaporozhian Cossacks, that established a republic amongst the various autocratic kingdoms. But they established a republic that was enlarged in their territory and in their population by the runaway slaves and by the freed slaves, the slaves that they freed from the Ottoman Empire. And this territory was always contested. It was at some point in the 17th century, it was really contested not only by the Ottomans and the Muscovite kingdom and the Polish kingdom, but also by the Swedish kingdom. Because I don't know if you're familiar, but there was a famous battle between the Swedish king and Peter the Great in the early 18th century in Poltava, which is like, you know, the heart of Ukraine. And as you know, when the Zaporozhian hetmanate, when they were seeking protection, and this is just a kind of the extent of their territory at some point. This is the map in Ukrainian, so I don't know if everybody can see it, but this is the border of kind of today's Ukraine. So you can see what kind of territory they have occupied. So this is today's Ukraine border, and this is the extent of the Zaporozhian siege. And so at some point they needed a protectorate in this very contested territory from the Ottomans and from the Poles. And they have asked for the protectorate from the Russians, and they signed these. There were several agreements of protectorate, of course, for the hetmanates, that they felt that they're just signing an agreement that the Russians will help them in their military, you know, when the time comes. But for the Russian Tsars, this was an easy way to capture that territory, and eventually they did. And where the extent of the Russian Empire, especially after the division of Poland in the late 18th century, Russian Empire extended all the way to like large part of Poland, incorporating everything that was part of the Polish kingdom, including the whole of the Ukrainian territory and Belarus and Lithuanian territories. All were part of the Russian Empire. And then when the Russian Empire fell after the revolution, for a very brief period of time, there was a moment of independence. This was the moment when really Ukraine was first time allowed to have an independent state. And it was very quickly, it only lasted, as you can see here, for a few years until during the Civil War, until the Bolsheviks were able to capture the whole of the territory and form the Soviet Union. There was two republics. One was the so-called Republic of Kiev from 17 to 21, and that's this kind of pink border. And then there was a smaller West Ukrainian People's Republic formed in 1918. it was really in the 19th century that the Ukrainian identity as separate from Polish or from the Russian identities was formed with the development of Ukrainian literature and art and culture. But it is also in the mid-19th century when this mythology of Kiev as the mother of Russian cities and of calling the Ukrainian people the quote-unquote little Russians and patronizing them as the small brother that needs to be part of the larger Russian state, and the quote-unquote fact that there was never such an identity as Ukrainian. All of those myths were formed in the 19th century in Russia as part of the colonial conquest, as part of the establishment of the Russian Empire in those territories. And then it was perpetuated by the Soviet Union, and it is perpetuated now, because if you hear Putin's speeches, he often talks about how there was never Ukraine as an independent country, and how there was never such people as Ukrainian, and how there were just little Russians, and how they are not capable or shouldn't be allowed to have their independence. And it's appalling on so many levels, and it's especially in the 21st century, you would imagine, right? If you think of one of my students who is British, was saying to me how strange to her it was to hear this talk about perpetuation of empire when she was raised in Great Britain. It was all the talk about decolonization and the end of the imperialism, and how imperialism is bad. And so for her, it was even kind of hard to imagine that there could be such a strong imperialist agenda in the contemporary 21st century situation. And it seems that the Russian just continuing that same agenda as the empire and then the Soviet Union. It's been 30 years of Ukrainian independence, and when the Soviet Union fell, everybody have agreed on the borders, and they've agreed on establishment of these independent states, and the borders have to be protected. I think the bottom line is that the country any country should not attack their neighbors or any other country. It just should not be done. It cannot be done. And it definitely cannot be done with such horror of kind of inhumanity that we are witnessing in Ukraine. And I think it's hard to imagine, and it's hard to believe that such levels of inhumanity are still possible. For me, I was raised by my grandmother. My parents had to work in the Soviet Union. Parents really couldn't stay home. Mothers is same as fathers. And my grandmother raised me, and she survived the war. She survived the war, the bombing of Kiev and the escape on the trains. And I grew up hearing all these stories. And for me, when the war started and they were talking about bombing of Kiev, and they were talking about needing to blow up bridges so that the Russian tanks could not cross the river, not to advance onto Kiev, it just sounded so horrendously and so shocking. And yet, I think one of the reasons it is so shocking for us is because we as a generation have not really experienced this conflict, right? It's the generation of our grandparents or great-grandparents for you that have lived through World War II or survived World War II, those who did. And it's a devastating conflict. What Victoria said about the generation living with PTSD, it seems that it's going to be maybe for more than one generation that will live with the ramification of this conflict. But hopefully right? We all pray. We all want Ukraine to survive, right? As the words of the national anthem, that the words of the national anthem say that Ukraine has not yet perished, right? So Ukraine has not perished and will not perish, and it will survive, and it will rebuild, and the traumas will heal, and it will be an independent country, finally rid of the Russian big brother and its claim on its territories. Okay, how do I return the, hold on 1 second. Ian, can you
Yes, I think
tell me what's the best way? Okay, I think it's in the participants, right? I can.
I already did it. I already
Oh, you did it already? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Of course. And thank you for sharing. I think the historical context behind it and explaining centuries long of development, right?
And
Done
it's centuries long of the territorial claim that is pretty much fabricated, right? It's fabricated as part of the colonial conquest.
exactly. It's a masquerade of a history that's been repeated rhetorically. And it's from all the speakers that we're hearing, we hear these stories. I just wanted to remind everyone that this is current. This is happening as we're speaking.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely terrifying that we're having an educational Zoom today in hopes of educating people on things that are happening right now. This isn't in retrospect. This is right now in the present. So thank you all the speakers for speaking, and thank you guys for watching my grandpa his video. Adriana, if you wanted to kind of describe how we're going to do the Q&A process.
Sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute. I would say this real quick. We appreciate all the speakers for speaking, especially you, Ian. We appreciate you showing us that video. For our audience, we are now going to go into the Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, you are more than welcome to directly message Ian your questions, and we'll go over those. Yeah.
Or if you can't, if you don't know how to directly message, you can just type it in the general chat box as well, if it's easier. Or if any members of Groupies had any questions or wanted to ask for further clarification on anything said, also feel welcome to do so. So we'll give it a few minutes to collect questions and then we could kind of commence. So we'll wait till around 1:03 and see what we have, and then we could review and kind of close out the meeting. Also, if you have a message for a specific speaker, mention who you want to answer. But if not, if it's a general question, I will pose it to Victoria and Natasha, and they could feel free to answer if they feel comfortable. All right, so I think we have a good amount of questions to start, so I don't want to waste anyone's time. Someone asked, what are some ways to inform people about what's going on? That's kind of a little broad, but maybe if you guys have any or could reference any sites or publications that you guys think are pretty objective and pretty telling or insightful, informational. Either one of you guys.
Okay, I can help on that. So there's a great podcast that is hosted by Ukrainian journalists called Explaining Ukraine. It has millions of followers on Twitter, and they are doing a pretty good job. But from my personal experience, what I believe is works best when people hear personal stories. Because when something is published in the newspaper or you hear something on the news, it kind of makes it a distant image from the movie scene, and you do not really believe it's true. You kind of know it's happening, but it kind of doesn't feel real. So if you heard some stories of people directly, or you know some people from Ukraine, it's great to amplify their voices and to share their stories, because this probably speaks directly to people's hearts, and they just connect to this easier, and they emphasize with it, and it works. So it's either some personal stories that you can share, or Explaining Ukraine is a great resource, and maybe Professor Natasha Medvedev has something to add to it.
No, I like maps, as you can see. So I'm following a particular website that is called criticalthreats.org that every day posts new update on the actual military situation. So which it shows detailed maps. So that's kind of where I try to get the most objective information about the actual military situation. And then I do follow several podcasts, like Victoria mentioned. But for me, it's, for me personally, maybe just because I'm so overwhelmed by this, and also just emotionally trying to process the situation. For me, the raw personal stories are very difficult to hear. So I prefer straight facts. So yeah, I prefer something that's less personal just for me, because that's how I process the trauma. For me, it's very hard, because then I don't sleep nights, and just I live through it. Like I really take it personally, a lot of what's happening. So for me, I try to be a little bit less involved and kind of more distant if I can. It's very hard, but it's kind of helpful mentally and emotionally in some way. So for me, this kind of raw data, the actual data with maps and details, the troops moved here and the troops moved there, it's kind of helpful to counter some raw emotional stories, personal stories.
Thank you both for sharing. Another individual asked, I've seen news saying that regular Russian citizens are being misinformed about what's happening. do the speakers have any perspectives on that? So misinformation for Russian citizens. Do either of you guys have anything? Yeah.
I can just say that, growing up in the Soviet Union, we've all experienced, those of us who grew up in the Soviet Union, the level of propaganda and the level of misinformation that is possible. The level of misinformation right now is actually on a higher level than anything that we've experienced in the Soviet Union. So it's not surprising that many Russians don't even know what's happening, or they're completely misinformed. But it's part of a larger symptom, or it's a larger symptom of a larger kind of sickness that country has, that state has, is it's for the government, and that was from we saw this in the Russian Empire, we saw this in the Soviet Union, and we see this now, that it is easier to feed your people misinformation than it is actually to govern them well, right? It's easy to create the myth of enemies and the myth of persecution and the myth of need to assert oneself and need to rally against the common enemy than to actually govern well. So the anti-Western propaganda, the anti-Ukrainian propaganda, and the propaganda that says that Ukrainian state are persecuting Russian-speaking people, that they have captured the Russian territory, that the Russian territory needs to be liberated from the Ukrainians. All of that has been perpetuated for quite some time. It's not new. We see this, like the actual military conflict might go back, might have started in 2014, but the kind of rhetoric that we're hearing on Russian news, on the television, and among the regular people, it's not new. I was in Moscow in 2005, and already then I was surprised by the anti-Ukrainian sentiment. Even my relative, whose mother was from Ukraine, he was raised in Moscow. Like when he met me in the airport, the first thing he said was, "Oh, Natasha, your English accent hasn't developed well, but your Ukrainian accent never left you." And he was so kind of denigrating about my Ukrainian identity or Ukrainian accent. And I'm like, really? My uncle? Like, why? It was so surprising and so strange to me at the time. But now, and I had so many conversations in the archives, and because I was working, my dissertation was on the Russian imperial identity and on the using art to justify colonial conquest. And I had so much negative reaction among people. They were challenging this idea of Russian imperial identity, and they were so anti-Ukraine already and so anti-West that it has long legs. This misinformation, it's not new what people are hearing today, but for many people it's easier to believe their television than anything else, especially and even when we talk to relatives in Russia and tell them, this is, what you're hearing on the news is not true. They don't believe it, because for them, it's something that was told to them by the newspaper Pravda, which translates as truth. And there was an old Soviet anecdote that there were two main newspapers. One was Izvestia, the news, and the other was Pravda, the truth. And the anecdote went that there was no news in the truth and there's no truth in the news. It loses its point in translation, but that's the point, that there was never any truth in the official newspapers or on television.
Thank you so much for that insight into misinformation, and just also censorship, just plain censorship. Censorship,
and it's censorship. All the independent news outlets have been declared foreign agents. those most of them had to leave the country because they are persecuted now. It's now illegal to call this special operation in Ukraine a war. It is illegal, and you can be imprisoned for a number of years for speaking about it. It's illegal to equate the Russian state to Nazi Germany now. It is illegal to talk about Russians as the fascists. So it's not just the misinformation. It's actually, it has a lot of political and like censorship, but also, the policing. It's now, the police state that is really controlling all of the sources of information.
Victoria, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Yeah. Okay. I also wanted to add that Russia is a censored state, but it's not Northern Korea. So if you want to read the news and if you want to look for something else behind what's offered by propaganda, you can. So from my communication with what I thought very educated friends in Russia, for many of them, it's a position of choice to believe, because it's hard to part with your imperial identities that we are Grand Russians and you Ukrainians, like a quasi-state, a fake language, and they are looking for facts to justify this. They don't want to part with this. So in a way, this propaganda is kind of consoling to them because they find that it justifies what's happening, and to believe the other thing that you can find on international media would destroy this myth. So I wouldn't say that they don't have any choice at all. They have Google still, I believe. They can find.
And they have Google, they have YouTube. They have access to YouTube. But you're absolutely right. They're choosing because it's much easier to believe the lie than to face the truth.
And my husband is Russian, so we had lots of friends from Russia who live abroad in Spain and US and all over the Europe. And even like 5 years ago, when we were meeting them in Spain, one of them told me, "So how is independent Ukraine?
Mm-hmm.
How is it in independent Ukraine?" And there's always this condescending approach to speaking about Ukraine. Even before all of this started, they never really considered us equal people, some kind of second class Soviet Union citizens. So that's not just Putin, and that's not just this 20 years propaganda. It's much deeper than that. They cannot make peace with having a neighbor who is a sovereign independent state and have their own language. Even in Ukraine, I grew up in the 90s, even though I was living in totally Ukrainian environment, but I was fluent in Russian, and I was trying to remember where did I get it from? No one spoke Ukrainian around me, but I didn't have access to Ukrainian books because Ukrainian publisher could not publish Ukrainian books. Ukrainian channels could not show Ukrainian cartoons for kids. All the media was occupied by curators from Russia. Lots of Ukrainian channels curate from Moscow. And when I came to Kiev, I entered one of the most prestigious universities of international relations, and lots of my group mates told me, "You really sound like a person when you speak Russian. In Ukrainian, you sound like a retard, because this is not a language, but when you speak Russian, you sound like a smart person. Speak Russian, you can speak it." I heard it multiple times because, it was this myth that if you want to go up the career ladder, you have to speak Russian because, those village Ukrainian people, what can they do? Can you even talk about science using Ukrainian? It's changing right now. Lots of Russian speakers, as it turned out, are fluent in Ukrainian. And right now, when they try to switch because they feel kind of responsible for this invasion, I mean, they are not, but it's just they share responsibility because Putin said he would be liberating Russian population that is under attack. But in reality, we Ukrainian speakers in Ukraine were for many years under this manipulation that we have to eventually switch because this won't lead us anywhere. So yeah, and then my friend also Russian, who I met in Thailand 10 years ago. She told me, so Russian is your not native language? I can hear that you're not, like, have an accent when you speak Russian, but I was just thinking this is some Ukrainian, thing. But in reality, you're a Russian speaker. So all of them had this attitude. Even without propaganda, even without Putin, they were growing up knowing that, there's a grand Russian identity and everybody else is just, a spoiled Russian, somebody who has to be adopted.
It's with propaganda. It's not that it's without propaganda. It's just propaganda that's 200 years old or 300 years old, right? It's so ingrained, and that's something that it's so ingrained that in this class on Russian avant-garde that I'm teaching, it never have occurred to me, and I'm a scholar of art history, and I grew up in Kiev, not in Moscow, but it never have occurred to me to think that Malevich, as a Russian artist, could have Ukrainian identity. It never even occurred to me, because it was never ever discussed, because it was always put down as something that is not legal, right? That no one can have a Ukrainian identity because there's no such thing. And there is so much to be still to be discovered of how much that Russification, that policies of Russification that were put upon the people, how much damage and destruction of the Ukrainian culture they have created.
Yes. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing and that interesting discussion about the dichotomy between the two languages and how that actually informs what's going on politically. So someone else asked, how is this affecting other countries? So aside from Russia and Ukraine, maybe bordering places, the United States, just generally, if you guys would like to answer that question or have the knowledge to do so, about how this conflict between Russia and Ukraine is affecting maybe economically, socially, politically, other countries. We can move on if you guys would prefer a different question too.
I'm not sure how it's affecting economically or politically, but one thing I can mention is that the Russians are not planning on stopping at Ukraine. And that's not surprising. So when Ukrainian leaders and when they're saying that Ukraine is fighting the war for Europe, it's true, because Russia is not planning on stopping. Its goal would be Poland and the Baltic states and the return to the former Russian imperial territories, if not moving beyond them. And I think Polish government understands that, the Polish people understand that pretty well also, because the heart of the conflict is even maybe more so with Poland than with Ukraine. It so far plays out in Ukraine, but Poland is definitely a goal for the Russians to think about, like that's where they're heading, because Poland was part of the Russian Empire also until the early 20th century. So it's really, but it's also, it's not only that, but it is also, in many Russians' perspectives, it's a conflict with the West, and many think that the war is already happening, that it's the Russian war with America just playing out on the Ukrainian territory. American might not know that yet, that they're fighting Russia, but that many Russians believe that. But that's because it's one of the elements is not only this necessity to possess Ukraine as its imperial territory, but it is also this position of not allowing Ukraine to join Europe or to join the West, because it's not only to have it for oneself, but it's also, they might even have allowed its independence if there would be no talks about joining the West. But because it seems that the joining the West or being independent or being not not Soviet, right? Because there's a lot of old Soviet policies and perceptions and mindset that is perpetuated in the Russian Federation. And this idea of trying to be not Soviet, trying to be different, trying to be not autocratic, trying to be not despotism, trying not, right, to be liberal, to be Western minded, that just goes against everything Russia stands for. So that's also part of that, of the reason for the conflict, is so that it cannot be part of the West.
Thank you. Victoria, anything else on this question, or we can move on?
Yeah, I wanted just to add that Poland very well understands that Russia is not going to stop there. And they have a saying, and it's, I don't remember who was the author of these words, but for at least, I heard it a long time ago, that without independent Poland, without independent Ukraine, there is no independent Poland.
Yeah.
They are well understanding that if Ukraine falls, then it opens the doors to the West. I'm not prepared to talk about the economic implications of this war. Obviously, there are people who are better informed. But yeah, it will have a huge global impact on the economies and social aspects. So what we are seeing is just the beginning.
There are now 3 million Ukrainians, 3 or even 4 maybe by now, that are in Europe and in Europe, some in America, the refugees.
And obviously that will have a
Just that will have impact, plus the impact on the food supply, you know, with the blockade of the grains, because Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, and beyond Europe also breadbasket of many countries, you know. So it's now that the ships with the harvest of grains is sitting in the ports and not being allowed to go to their destinations, that's will lead to major issues.
Yes. Thank you both for answering that question. Thank you, Victoria, for bringing up that saying. I think it's very telling of, you know, the knowledge that people have overseas of what Ukraine represents. That kind of maybe that kind of buffer for Europe. So another question, maybe kind of in between our last 2 questions, I think. So second to last, how can we help those in Ukraine? Is there websites where we can check out in order to help, either by donating or sending supplies? Before you guys share, I did have a resource that I found that maybe can you guys see my screen, or yes?
Yeah.
So these are some organizations that
Yeah, we actually see the
We're
screen.
still on your grandfather's video.
okay. All right, well, I could just read it out. The Ukrainian Red Cross is one, Voices of Children, and a few others. Maybe it's best if the speakers know any ones that they have. I wish I could have showed you the screen, but
I just posted into the chat the official government one that has several places. There's a way to donate for defense, for medical aid, and for rebuilding, for the future rebuilding or for the current rebuilding. It's the u24.gov.ua.
yes, it's in the chat. So thank you so much for sharing that link. And then that is a direct link towards the Ukrainian government.
Yes,
correct?
that is the direct link. I'm looking for one more that I had. That was a very reputable organization.
In the meantime, Victoria, do you have any references?
Sure. I just have to make a disclaimer. I have 6 minutes left on this computer, so in case I shut down, I will have to switch to the other one. But
Okay.
while I'm here, I have it's a good idea to share directly to Ukrainian Red Cross, but there's a global Red Cross, and we had questions with that. There was an ongoing investigation that they gathered millions of funds, but nobody really saw them in Ukraine. So it's better to, even if they will donate, it will take months because there's lots of bureaucracy. So it's better to find Ukrainian organizations. There's a fund that is headquartered in New York called Together for Ukraine. They help army and they have humanitarian missions. I'll throw the link in here. And there are several big volunteers, famous volunteers in Ukraine who also are able to buy some unmanned aerial vehicles real fast and deploy them to the army if you want to aid the army, because I just feel that everyone wants to help some humanitarian missions while our army needs help, you know, keeping Russians away from the east. So it would be great if you can reach out to Razom for Ukraine. I'll throw the link, and the volunteer Sergio Pritula, who is gathering funds to actually help our soldiers. I'll try to look them up and just throw into the chat so you could locate them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing those links. Natasha, did you find
It's Stand with Ukraine. Let me see. Hold on one second. So the Stand with Ukraine has a list of resources. Let me just see what it is. It's
and I actually believe this is probably one of the best questions to leave off on. I don't want to reintroduce things. Kind of ending off on a note of support and kind of time for action as well from people who are joining or have tuned in today to the Zoom. You can actually be a part of the process in some capacity. Victoria earlier was saying that she was considering, you know, getting even further involved on the front. Obviously, that's extremely noble and truly shows how much this conflict is bringing out what it's bringing out of people. But I'm sure everyone and everyone's donations, no matter how big or how small, can help in some way if we are allocating them to the correct places. So I'm grateful for Natasha and Victoria for sharing organizations and ways you can help that will maybe streamline the process and try to get around the bureaucracy of shifting money around. So thank you guys so much for sharing those.
Standwithukraine.how has a lot of various links. It has various resources, including various types of donations for medical supplies. Razom for Ukraine also is listed here, so it has a lot of resources and official sources for the news, for disseminating information. So there is a lot of information there.
Perfect.
Like a link tree.
All right. Victoria, anything? I know you may be getting, you said you had a limited amount of time left on your laptop. Did you have any last comments or things you wanted to say?
I'm just grateful that there's still interest in what's happening in Ukraine, despite it being the 96th day of this scary and tragic war. And I hope that people will stay active on this, and they won't lose interest and won't get used to this. We can't get through this war. We've been bombed with news and with pictures from this war, and it feels like it can be worse. we've seen, but I'm afraid the worst is still ahead of us. So let's just all remain active in our ways to stop this.
Thank you so much.
Stay
Yes.
here.
And that's a big reason we wanted to have a meeting like this right on the 96th day. Because I personally and the people in our group felt that the media was very heavy at the beginning of the war, at least domestically, and now I feel like there is a lag, and and things like this, even though it's not a massive event, can help spread care, and people could be more attentive, because this is happening right now. Things that tragedies that both of you guys have brought up are happening now. So thank you both for sharing. Natasha, do you have any closing sentiments at all?
I'm totally with Victoria. I feel that it's important to keep to keep talking about it, because I think it's the worst thing that could happen is when people get used to the war, get used to the tragedy, and that it becomes kind of everyday news or everyday occurrence, and then people stop caring, and that's the worst that could happen. So I feel that what you're doing is amazing, and I'm so glad that somebody cares, that you care to organize this group and to talk about it, to organize this talk, and to be interested in how to help and how to disseminate the information, because I think that's very important, is for us to keep talking, because it's the tragedies that Victoria mentioned and others. It's happening. It's happening, and from the historical perspective, I keep telling my students, when we learn about Stalinism right now in the Russian avant-garde class, I keep telling them, you're living through history. We are experiencing now a lot of things that were happening during the Civil War 100 years ago, and during the Stalinism. So it's living history, but we don't want it to be history. We want to help to stop the conflict, right? Like, we don't want to come to it decades later and analyze it. We want to be able to help and to stop it now. It has to end, because people are dying and people's lives will never be the same. It's the trauma that the people are experiencing is beyond comprehension. And so it's definitely important to keep awareness.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I again want to thank our speakers and thank everyone who's a part of putting this together. This was a very informational Zoom. I personally very educated on what was going on, and I'm just beyond grateful for what's been shared, and it's inspired me to participate more. So we're all gonna everyone is gonna say bye, who's a part of just the production, and we'll just say goodbye and thank everyone. So, Angel.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I sent you like 3 emails, but it was like just because it was a little weird. But I'm so glad you joined. I do remember last semester taking you, and you did say you were from Kiev, and so you kind of came up for me. And I know we didn't have a Zoom, like we didn't have any Zoom meetings, so it was kind of nice to get to know you now and the history of the Ukraine and Russian.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining. Guest speakers of Victoria and your grandfather Ian. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Well, we really do appreciate it. And I know you said that it is important that we're doing this for other people, but I think it's important that other people have this to fall back upon in case they need support or help or for whatever it is. And it's not the fact that we're doing this that's important. It's the fact that it's happening in general. That it's an issue that needs to be resolved, and not by us, by people in general. And we're appreciative of the fact that we can help, and we can do this to help alleviate people's stress about to help donate money or for whatever it is. We're glad that we can do that for other people. And we really appreciate you guys for coming and speaking with us, and everybody who joined and came in to listen. We really appreciate that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining again. Those stories were really heartbreaking, but I'm really glad you were comfortable enough to share it with us. And you too, Ian, your grandparent, and Victoria, even though she's not here right now, but thank you again.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for everyone for joining. Take care.